26 million Americans are about to sit underneath a severe weather threat that begins in 5 hours. 8 to 10 inches of rain are about to fall on drought-cracked Texas counties through Sunday morning. A tornado parameter the operational community does not see in early June is sitting over southern Canada at sundown. 6 western states are simultaneously under critical fire weather. 18 river flood warnings are still active across the Central Plains, several upgraded to moderate severity overnight, and the European weather model is hinting at a tornado outbreak across Minnesota and Wisconsin on Wednesday, just as the first significant heatwave of summer locks in behind it. 6 storms, 1 pattern, 96 hours. If what we are about to walk through is a coincidence, it is one of the strangest ones forecasters have ever had to explain. If it is not a coincidence, then what exactly is the atmosphere doing? If this has you hooked, subscribe to the Sky Lab because we are tracking this whole compound week as it unfolds. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and which of these threats hits closest to your zip code. Share this video to help us grow this community. Now, let's get into it. Part 1. There is not one storm. You have to stop just for a second and look at the map. Right now, as you watch this, there is a slow-moving upper-level low parked over the desert of West Texas, slowly dragging itself northeast like something that is in no particular hurry. A few hundred miles north of it, a strengthening shortwave trough is digging into the Great Lakes, sliding a cold front toward an air mass east of the Mississippi that has been sitting in the 80s and 90s for days. A few hundred miles north of that, just across the international border into southern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba, the high-resolution rapid refresh model is showing a significant tornado parameter value that one operational forecaster called something he had not seen in that region in a very long time. A few hundred miles south of all of that, 21 red flag warnings are stacked across 6 western states, with humidity in single digits and gusts hitting 40 miles per hour. And behind every one of those, the Missouri River, the Grand River, and the Platte River are still rising across Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska, 18 separate flood warnings still in effect, several of them upgraded to moderate severity overnight while you were sleeping. That is what is happening right now. That is the snapshot at the moment this video goes live, and if you tried to write that paragraph last Tuesday, you would have sounded like you were describing the worst week of the entire summer, except it is not the worst week of the summer. It is one Saturday morning, and that is before the next 96 hours even begins, because here is what nobody's saying out loud. There is no single storm coming. There is a pattern. And the pattern is producing 6 different storms in 6 different parts of the continent at the same time, all driven by the same upstream atmospheric configuration. Damaging wind thunderstorms over the Ohio Valley and the Northeast tonight. A slow-moving upper low spilling 8 to 10 inches of rain over drought-cracked Texas counties through Sunday morning. A possible, large tornado outbreak over the Canadian prairie this evening. Critical fire weather across 6 western states for days. An ongoing river flood disaster in the Central Plains that nobody has stopped covering because it never actually ended. A Tuesday and Wednesday severe weather reload across the northern plains and the upper Midwest that the European model is markedly more aggressive about than the American one, with what some forecasters are quietly calling tornado outbreak potential across Wisconsin and Minnesota. And behind all of that, the first significant heat wave of the entire summer, locking in over the central and eastern United States by mid to late next week. 6 events, 1 pattern, 1 96-hour window. You have been on this channel long enough to know what we do here. We do not chase one storm. We watch what the atmosphere is doing across the entire continent, all at once, and we ask whether the things happening in different places at the same time are actually separate things, or whether they are the same thing wearing different costumes. That is the question I want you holding in your mind for the next 2 hours. Because what is happening right now is not normal, not in the sense of unprecedented, the way social media wants every weather event to feel unprecedented. Normal in the boring sense, in the climatological sense, in the sense that meteorologists who have been doing this job for 30 years use the word. June compound severe weather weeks happen. June tornado outbreaks happen. June flash floods happen. June surface lows happen. What is unusual is the simultaneity, the pattern, the fact that you can take 6 different categories of severe weather, light each one of them on fire in a different part of the continent, and trace every single one of them back to the same upstream wave configuration, in the same jet stream on the same map. That is what we are going to walk through, piece by piece, over the next 2 hours. We are going to start with what is happening tonight in the Ohio Valley and across the northeast, where the most intense severe weather window opens between 3 and 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and 26 million people are sitting under a slight risk for damaging winds. We are going to move to what is happening at the same time over Texas, where a slow-moving upper low is about to dump enough water on drought-baked ground to produce one of the worst flash flood corridors of the early summer. We are going to look at the tornado window over southern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba, where the significant tornado parameter is doing things it does not normally do in early June. We are going to walk through the river flood disaster that never actually ended in the Central Plains, where the rivers are now about to be reloaded by Tuesday's incoming surface low, even before they have a chance to recede. We are going to lay out Sunday's reload, Monday's intermediate quiet, and then we're going to spend serious time on Tuesday and Wednesday, because the multi-model convergence on Wednesday is the part of this story that should be making you pay closest attention. And behind all of it, we're going to talk about the heat dome that is locking into place behind the troughs, and about the published science that explains why all 6 of these things are happening at once, and about what the question actually is when you put the whole picture together. But before any of that, I want to tell you the one thing that you're going to need to hold on to from the moment we set foot in Part 2 all the way to the end of Part 10. There is a published scientific framework for what we are watching. It is not new. It is not fringe. It is in the peer-reviewed literature, in journals like Nature Climate Change and Water Resources Research and Communications Earth and Environment. The framework has a name. It is called quasi-resonant amplification, and it describes exactly the situation where a single stationary high-amplitude pattern in the jet stream produces simultaneous geographically separated extreme weather events across the northern hemisphere mid-latitudes. The first papers on it are now more than a decade old. The mechanism is established. What we are watching this Saturday, over 6 different parts of North America at the same time, looks structurally identical to what those papers describe. I'm going to tell you about that framework in detail in Part 9. I'm going to walk through what the science actually says, what the published mechanism is, what makes the next 96 hours look exactly like the operational expression of it, and what makes it possible to argue against. I am also going to tell you, before we even get there, that there is a perfectly reasonable interpretation of everything we're about to see, where it is simply a bad week. Bad weeks happen. The historical record is full of them. The 2010 Millbury, Ohio, F4 tornado happened on this exact calendar date 16 years ago, which is a small piece of evidence that June compound severe weather is not without precedent. So we're going to hold both interpretations open, in the way this channel always does, and we're going to let the data speak. For right now, in the next minute or so, I just want you to feel the shape of the thing. 6 events, 1 pattern, 96 hours. The pattern is real, and the events are coming, and the question is not whether they will happen, but whether what they collectively mean is more than the sum of the parts. There is a moment in every continent-scale severe weather event when you can see the whole map at once, and the map is doing something the map does not normally do, and you have a choice about how you're going to think about it. You can choose to think about the Ohio Valley as one story, and Texas as another, and Saskatchewan as a third, and the western fire weather as a fourth, and the Central Plains flooding as a fifth, and the Tuesday-Wednesday reload as a sixth. Or you can choose to think about all of it as one pattern, and ask what the pattern is doing. We are going to do the second one, together, right now. Now you might be thinking, okay, you have been building this up for 10 minutes. Where is the meat? Fair. Let's go. Part 2. Saturday tonight. Over 26 million Americans. The Storm Prediction Center put out their Day 1 outlook just after 7 o'clock Central Time this morning, and it is the one that we have to start with, because it is the one that is loaded right on top of the most population. There is a slight risk corridor that stretches from central Indiana through the upper Ohio Valley, all the way into southern New England. The slight risk is the level 2 of 5 risk category, which sounds modest until you start counting the cities sitting under it. Columbus is in it, Cleveland is in it, Pittsburgh is in it, Toledo is in it, Akron is in it, and the broader marginal risk extends to New York City, to Philadelphia, to Detroit, which means even if the nastier stuff stays focused on the Ohio Valley bullseye and western Pennsylvania, the broader threat reaches 26 million Americans before you even count the marginal zone. So let's talk about what is driving it. because the synoptic setup matters here, and it is going to matter even more when we get to Texas in the next part. A deepening upper-level trough is digging into the Great Lakes through the day. The water vapor loop from this morning shows it clearly, this kind of curling, intensifying signature over the eastern half of the country. Ahead of the trough, mid-level speed maxima are sliding east across the upper Ohio Valley and into New England. That is what the SPC narrative calls strengthening large-scale ascent, and what it means in plain language is that the air column ahead of the trough is being lifted, persistently, over a wide area, all at the same time. Now, that lifting is happening over an air mass that has been sitting in the 80s and 90s for days. The Boston area forecast discussion from this morning describes a moderately unstable atmosphere, with CAPE values somewhere between 500 and 1,000 joules per kilogram, with some guidance hinting at locally higher values approaching 1,500 joules per kilogram. The New York City office is looking at CAPE values between 1,000 and 1,500 joules per kilogram across the interior. The Philadelphia AFD describes low-level lapse rates of 7.5 to 8 degrees Celsius per kilometre, which is steep enough to support strong downdrafts and gusty winds out of any storm that develops. The Baltimore and Washington office is looking at mid-level flow strengthening to 30 to 40 knots in the afternoon and evening as the upper trough pushes, height falls into the region. What that all adds up to, in operational terms, is a setup where the primary threat is damaging wind gusts. We are talking about sustained 60-mile-per-hour winds, with isolated pockets of 70-mile-per-hour winds, capable of snapping tree limbs, dropping power lines, and turning anything you have left out in your backyard into a projectile. If you live in the corridor I have just described, this is the part of the broadcast where I tell you to tie down your trampoline and your patio furniture and your trash cans before lunchtime. Because once these storms get going, the wind is the thing. There is also a hail component. The SPC is showing a concentrated 15% risk for scattered large hail, and that risk is highest right across the upper Ohio Valley. We are talking about Youngstown. We are talking about Canton. We are talking about Pittsburgh. The mechanism is that the early phase of the convection in this region is expected to feature discrete supercells, which is to say, individual rotating thunderstorms that have not yet merged into a line. Discrete supercells produce hail. Linear convection mostly does not. So the early window, from about 3 or 4 in the afternoon Eastern Time, before the storms start linking up into a more organised squall line, is the highest hail window. Quarter-size hail is the realistic expectation. Larger than quarter size is possible in the strongest cores. If you're caught underneath one of those early supercells, you want to be inside. There is also a low-end tornado risk. The SPC is showing a 2% isolated tornado probability, concentrated mostly over eastern Ohio into western Pennsylvania. I want to be really clear about what that means. 2% isolated is not a tornado outbreak. The primary threat is wind. The hail is the secondary threat. The tornado risk is the tertiary, the thing you cannot rule out but should not be focused on. The mechanism is that when you have wind shear strong enough to organize discrete supercells, and the supercells are sitting in an instability profile this loaded, you cannot rule out 1 or 2 brief spin-ups. The peak window for any isolated tornadoes is between 4 and 9 in the evening Eastern Time, over the eastern Ohio to western Pennsylvania corridor. I want to underline something here. June tornadoes in this part of the country are not unusual. Today, June 6th, is actually the anniversary of the Millbury, Ohio EF4 tornado of 2010. That tornado tore across northwest Ohio at the very same time of year we're talking about right now. So when I tell you that the tornado risk is the low-end tertiary threat, I do not want you to read that as the tornado risk is hypothetical. It is climatologically real. It is just that the dominant mode tonight is going to be straight-line damaging wind, not rotating supercells. The timing of the most intense activity, broadly, is going to be a window that opens around 3 in the afternoon Eastern Time and closes around 8 in the evening. The morning is going to look messy, with some non-severe showers and storms moving through, and you might think the threat is over by lunchtime. It is not. The real show starts in the afternoon when the sun comes out and starts destabilizing the atmosphere from west to east. By 3, the discrete supercells start firing across the upper Ohio Valley. By 4 or 5, they are merging into more organized clusters and lines. By 6 or 7, you are looking at potentially bowing line segments racing toward the I-95 corridor. By 8 or 9 in the evening, the activity is reaching the coast, and the threat is winding down behind it overnight. If you're headed to anything outdoor tonight, you need to be paying attention. The Memorial Tournament is going to be in Columbus, drawing huge crowds, and Columbus is sitting right under the bullseye. The Governor's Ball in Queens is going to have radar to watch. Anybody headed to the Yankees game in the Bronx on Saturday evening should be checking the radar before they leave the house. If you are running errands, if you're at a barbecue, if you're doing anything outdoor, this is the kind of afternoon where conditions fall apart fast. Not over hours, over minutes. Inside of a 15-minute window in your particular zip code, you can go from sun and warm humidity to a downburst with 65-mile-per-hour winds. That is the mode of failure here. Have a way to take shelter. Have a way to know when the warning gets issued. The federal warning machinery is going to do its job tonight. The question is whether you are going to be paying attention when it does. Now, the meteorology nerd part of this story is the part about why the damaging wind threat is the dominant mode rather than the tornado threat. Tornadoes need a particular vertical wind profile, with sharp veering of winds with height and strong low-level shear and a low cloud base. Damaging wind thunderstorms need steep lapse rates, dry mid-levels, and a setup where downburst air can accelerate downward as it evaporates rain. Tonight's environment over the Ohio Valley and the Northeast is a damaging wind setup, not a tornado setup because the low-level shear is modest, the lapse rates are very steep, and the dry mid-level air column is going to set up downburst events when the storms collapse. That is why the Philadelphia and Washington and Baltimore offices are all emphasizing wind gusts. The setup just is what it is. The one thing I want to flag for the audience is that there is a moisture limitation question with this event. Some of the forecast models are hinting that the air mass might end up being slightly drier than expected, and a drier air mass can produce convection that struggles to organize. The Philadelphia office specifically calls out this risk. The Boston office calls it out too. So the question of how widespread the severe weather actually ends up being is partially a function of how much moisture the air column actually has when the cold front arrives. The forecast assumes adequate moisture. The mode of failure would be less convection than expected. The mode of success would be the widespread damaging wind event the SPC is currently expecting. You can tell me all day that you live in central Pennsylvania, and tonight is going to be a bust. The forecaster failure mode is real, but the upside is real too. And the threat the SPC is currently showing, the area they have drawn the slight risk over, the number of people sitting under it, the timing window, the mechanism, that is what we are going to assume is going to happen. Because the alternative is to assume it will not happen. And if you are wrong about that, you have a power line on your house. So we behave as if it will happen. We take it seriously. And the second the warning gets issued for your county, we move. That is tonight. That is the first of 6. And while you're watching the cold front move across the Ohio Valley, 93 million miles away, the same upper low that is firing those storms is doing something completely different to the state of Texas. Let's go there next. Part 3. Saturday over Texas. A storm stops moving. There is a particular kind of severe weather event that meteorologists are quietly the most afraid of, and it is not the one with the loud television coverage. It is not the bomb cyclone. It is not the tornado outbreak. It is the slow-moving upper low. Because here is the secret about a slow-moving upper low. It does not need to be intense to be dangerous. It does not need to have a particularly impressive central pressure. It does not need to spin up rotating supercells. It just needs to sit still. And when it sits still over an air mass with anomalously high, precipitable water values, what happens is that the same patch of ground gets convected over, again and again and again, for hours, with each cell training over the previous one's footprint. That is the textbook setup for catastrophic flash flooding. It is the setup that produced the Houston flooding of the Memorial Day weekend a couple of years ago. It is the setup that produced the Wimberley flood. It is the setup, before we get into anything else, that today is producing across central and northern Texas through Sunday morning. The upper low is currently parked over the Permian Basin in West Texas. It is making gradual northeastward progress, but the operative word in that sentence is gradual. The system is not racing across the state. It is dragging itself slowly over the top of an air mass that has precipitable water values streaming north of 2 inches. That number does not sound like much. It is. 2-inch precipitable water over central Texas in early June is at the 95th percentile for the date. The air mass currently sitting over the Houston metropolitan area is among the most moisture-loaded that part of the state ever sees in the first week of June. and the convection that is going to develop on top of that air mass is going to be efficient, which is the technical word that means the storms are going to convert a lot of that water vapor into rain in a very short amount of time. We already have an active flash flood warning, issued just before 10 in the morning Central Time, for southwestern Armstrong County and southeastern Randall County in the Texas Panhandle. The Doppler radar is showing thunderstorms producing heavy rain. Up to 1.5 inches of rain has already fallen in that warning polygon, and additional rainfall amounts of up to 3 inches are still expected, before the warning expires at 12:45 in the afternoon Central Time. That is the small-scale, immediate tactical piece of the puzzle. That is what your phone is alerting you about right now if you happen to be sitting in Amarillo. The bigger picture is the one in the central Texas counties, where a flood warning is currently active for eastern Bell, for Falls, for southwestern Limestone, for southeastern McLennan, for northwestern Milam, and for west central Robertson counties through 1 in the afternoon. The low water crossings are already inundated. The mechanism in central Texas is the same as the mechanism in the Panhandle, just on a bigger scale and over a wider area. Heavy rainfall is occurring. Heavy rainfall has already occurred. The runoff is already in the creeks and the stock tanks and the small tributaries. The next 24 hours is going to make those numbers worse. Now, the operational forecast for what happens in the next 24 hours is where the numbers get really uncomfortable. The Fort Worth area forecast discussion released at 5 in the morning Central Time describes the setup like this. Scattered convection with moderate to heavy rainfall continues to affect the central Texas counties through the pre-dawn hours. After sunrise, a rapid expansion of activity is expected up the I-35 corridor, becoming widespread. Most of the daytime convection on Saturday is going to be near and east of I-35 within a band of localized descent. By Saturday evening, here is where the model output starts to look really concerning. The upper low and the trough axis, along with the anomalously high precipitable water values, are going to become juxtaposed such that widespread new convective development capable of heavy rainfall will begin training across western portions of North Texas. And this training pattern could persist for several hours into Sunday morning. Training. That is the operative word. Convective training is what happens when a single chain of thunderstorm cells passes over the same geographic area, one after another, like railroad cars on a track. Each cell drops its rain on the same spot. The same patch of ground takes hit after hit after hit. The localized rainfall accumulation goes up faster than any single storm rainfall accumulation possibly could, because you are not measuring one storm, you are measuring a chain. So what are the numbers that the modelling is showing for the rainfall accumulation in the training corridor? Here is where you need to listen carefully, because the headline forecast and the worst-case forecast are not the same number. The headline forecast, the one that the Fort Worth Flood Watch is officially advertising, is 6 to 8 inches of rain through Sunday morning, with the bullseye focused on an area near and west of I-35 and near and north of I-20. That is the official number. That is what the warnings on your phone are going to say. 6 to 8 inches of rain in a single 24-hour window over urban and suburban North Texas is, by itself, an extreme flash flood producing event. 6 to 8 inches falling on hardened drought-cracked soil that has been baking in the sun is the kind of rainfall that floods every low-water crossing, every underpass, every stream and every creek and every storm drain in a region the size of a New England state. So the headline number, before we even talk about anything else, is already an extreme event. But the headline number is not the worst-case number. The worst-case number comes from the High-Resolution Rapid Refresh Ensemble Forecast System, the HREF, specifically the probability match mean output, which is one of the more aggressive guidance products in the operational toolkit. The HREF probability matched mean for this event is suggesting a reasonable worst-case bullseye of 8 to 10 inches of rainfall in the I-35 to I-20 quadrant through Sunday morning. The Fort Worth office is officially advertising the more conservative 6 to 8 inch number, because the higher end values are only supported by 1 or 2 ensemble members at this time. But the higher end values are on the table, they are not off the table, they are in the guidance. And here is where the drought to deluge piece of the story matters, because we have covered this on the channel before. We covered it back in the worst drought in recorded history video back in early May. We covered it when the drought was about to break and we said what was replacing it was worse. Today is the day the trade got executed. Today is the day the bill came due. The corridor that's about to take 8 to 10 inches of rain is in extreme to exceptional drought. The ground in that corridor is not just dry, it is concrete. Drought-hardened ground does not absorb water, It repels it. When a thunderstorm dumps 3 inches of rain in an hour onto a drought-hardened county, the rain does not soak in. It runs off. It runs off into the creeks. It runs off into the bayous. It runs off into the storm drains and overwhelms them in minutes. The Houston area forecast discussion makes the point directly. The Houston metropolitan area got rainfall yesterday. The soil along the I-10 corridor is now saturated. Any additional rainfall today is going to transition to runoff faster than usual. The 00ZHREF guidance continues to suggest the potential for localized rainfall maxima exceeding 4 inches in the Houston metro, with the bullseye most likely sitting near or south of E10. The PWAT values streaming into the area are above 2 inches. The rain rates are peaking in the 3 to 4 inch per hour range. The Wallace Press Conference Center, the I-10 underpasses, the Bayou system, all of that infrastructure is about to be tested in real time across the late afternoon and evening hours. What is going on with the San Bernard River and the Lavaca-Navidad River Basin is also worth flagging, because both river basins are being watched for rises tied to upstream rainfall that has already fallen. The official call right now is that we are only looking at isolated rises into action stage, but that call is based on the rainfall that has already happened. It does not include the rainfall that is going to fall over the next 24 hours. If the HREF worst-case bullseye plays out anywhere close to its forecast, those river basins are going to start telling a different story by Sunday morning. So here is the picture across Texas through Sunday. An upper low slowly dragging itself northeast across the state, sitting still long enough to load multiple training corridors of severe convection with rainfall rates of 3 to 4 inches per hour, against a backdrop of anomalously moist air mass at the 95th percentile for the date, falling on drought-hardened ground that cannot absorb anything. The official flood watch advertises 6 to 8 inches in 24 hours over a North Texas bullseye. The aggressive HREF guidance advertises 8 to 10. The Panhandle is already taking the front edge of it. The Houston metro is in the soaked soil amplification corridor. The river basins are being watched. This is the kind of weather event where, if you live in the bullseye, you do not drive into water on the road. You do not. Drought-hardened ground produces the fastest developing flash floods in the country. The water is going to come up faster than you can react to it. Turn around, do not drown. That advice exists because it is true. And here is the other thing about a slow-moving upper low. It is not done when you think it is done. The Saturday rainfall is the Texas part of the story, but on Sunday the same upper low is going to lift further northeast, and the same training corridor mechanism is going to set up across Missouri and Arkansas and eastern Kansas and eastern Oklahoma. We are going to come back to that in part 6. For right now, the message about Texas is simple. The threat tonight is real. The numbers in the bullseye are extreme. The infrastructure in the corridor is going to be tested. If you are in the E35 corridor, if you are anywhere near and west of E35 and north of E20, if you are along the E10 corridor in Houston, you should not be on the road after sundown unless you absolutely have to be. You should be paying attention to your phone. You should know what river or creek or bayou your house is closest to and where you would go if it came up. This is the second of 6 events firing tonight. Slow-moving upper low, 8 to 10 inch bullseye. Drought-cracked ground. Same big picture pattern that is producing the Ohio Valley severe weather we just walked through. Same atmospheric configuration. Different weapon. The third one is even less expected because most of the audience watching this video has never thought of southern Manitoba as tornado country. That is about to change for one evening. Part 4. Saturday evening over the Canadian prairie. There is a number that operational severe weather forecasters use that you should know. It is called the Significant Tornado Parameter, STP for short. It is a composite index, which is to say it is a number that combines several different ingredients of the atmosphere, including the storm relative helicity, the lifted condensation level height, the convective available potential energy, and the deep layer wind shear, into a single value that tells you, broadly, how favourable an environment is for the formation of significant tornadoes. By significant tornadoes, the literature means EF2 or stronger. The scale runs from 0 at the low end up to 10 or higher at the very high end. When the STP is between 0 and 1, you are in a regime where tornadoes are possible, but the environment is not particularly favourable. When the STP is between 1 and 3, you're in a regime where tornadoes are reasonably possible, and at least some of them can be strong. When the STP starts climbing above 4, you're looking at an environment that produces significant tornadoes when storms are able to form. The high-resolution rapid refresh model output for Saturday evening, between roughly 8 and 9 o'clock local time, has the STP over an area east of Regina and west of Brandon in southern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba sitting at 5.2. That is not a number you see every day in that region in early June. Multiple operational sources have flagged it independently of one another. One forecaster called it just not something that you see every day. Another flagged it as the day's highest single-cell tornado risk anywhere on the continent. And the meteorological setup that supports that STP reading is consistent with what we would expect to see if we were going to get 1 or 2 or possibly more large tornadoes in that corridor on Saturday evening. Let's walk through what is producing it. The same broad upper-level trough that is feeding the Ohio Valley severe weather and the Texas flash flood is also doing work on the synoptic pattern over the Canadian prairie. There is a deepening surface low near the Montana-North Dakota border that is going to fire off a round of late-afternoon supercells across the US side. But the surface configuration extends north across the border, with the cold front, the dry-line boundary, and the warm sector all setting up across the southern Canadian prairie. By Saturday afternoon, the warm sector air over southern Manitoba and southern Saskatchewan is going to be in the upper 70s and low 80s Fahrenheit, with dew points climbing into the upper 60s as Gulf of Mexico moisture works its way north along the low-level jet. That gives you the instability ingredient. The wind profile is where the setup gets really concerning. The low-level jet is going to be strengthening through the evening as the surface low deepens. The mid-level winds are going to be backing, which is to say turning more southerly with height, which sets up the directional wind shear that organises rotating supercells. The lifted condensation level over the warm sector is going to be relatively low, in the range that supports tornado formation. The storm relative helicity values, which measure the rotational potential in the lower atmosphere, are forecast to climb into the range that supports significant tornadoes. Put all of that together and you get an STP reading of 5.2, which is a number you simply do not see in that region in early June, not very often, not without something specific happening. And what is specific about today is the position of the upper trough, the strength of the surface low, the position of the warm sector. All of that is being driven by the same pattern that is producing severe weather in 5 other places on the continent at the same time. The window for the worst of this is going to open around 8 in the evening local time and close around midnight. The peak STP values are at the top of the 8 to 9 evening window. The storm mode question, the one variable that determines whether the tornado threat materializes the way the parameters suggest it should, is whether storms remain discrete supercells or whether they organize into linear segments before tornado initiation. If the storm mode is discrete supercells, southern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba are going to see at least 1 and possibly more large tornadoes Saturday evening. If the storm mode is linear, the threat probably stays in the damaging wind and hail mode, and the tornado threat goes down. The high-resolution rapid refresh is showing a discrete supercell signature in its hourly output. That is the model's vote. The model can be wrong, but the model is what we have for resolving the storm mode question at the front edge of the forecast, and the model is saying discrete supercells. The cities under the highest of the threat are not as large as the ones we just walked through over the Ohio Valley. Regina, with a population somewhere around 230,000. Brandon, with a population around 50,000. Yorkton, the communities along the Yellowhead Highway and Highway 1 running through the southern Canadian prairie. The populations are smaller than the Ohio Valley populations, but the threat per person is significantly higher because the tornado intensity supported by the environment is significantly higher than the brief spin-ups the SPC is showing for eastern Ohio. I want to spend a minute on what makes the Canadian prairie tornado threat different from the Ohio Valley tornado threat tonight, because the audience watching this is mostly American, and the US tornado climatology is the one we are familiar with. The US tornado climatology has its peak intensity in the Central Plains and the Mid-South, with Oklahoma and Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa and Missouri taking the big tornado risk in April and May, and the eastward shift toward Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee taking the risk in late autumn and winter. Canadian tornado climatology, by contrast, peaks in midsummer, with most of the tornado days concentrated in late June, July, and August across the southern prairie provinces. Today is on the front edge of that climatological window. Early June large tornadoes in southern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba are not unprecedented. The 2007 Ely F5 happened on the 22nd of June. The 2018 Alonso F4 happened on the 3rd of August. The 2021 Scarth tornado happened on the 7th of August. But the climatological peak is later in the summer than today, and the events that do happen in early June tend to involve a setup like the one we are watching now, where a strong synoptic scale trough drives a strong surface low into a moist warm sector with strong wind shear. If you live in southern Saskatchewan or southern Manitoba, and you're watching this video, the operational message is the same as the operational message for the Ohio Valley. Be paying attention to the Environment Canada warnings tonight. Have a way to take shelter. Be in your basement or in an interior room on the lowest floor of your building the second a tornado warning gets issued. Do not assume that because tornadoes are climatologically more common later in the summer, you are safe tonight. The environment is loaded. The thing I want to underline about this Canadian piece of the story is that, for the audience watching this video back in the United States, it might feel like a footnote. It is not. The reason it is in the video at all, the reason we are spending a part on it, is that the Saskatchewan-Manitoba tornado risk is being driven by the same upper trough that is driving the Ohio Valley severe weather and the Texas flash flood. The same atmospheric pattern that is firing 8 to 10 inch rain training corridors over central Texas this evening is firing STP 5.2 tornado environments over the Canadian prairie at the same time. That is not a coincidence. That is the pattern. That is the thing I want you to be holding in your mind as we keep going. 5 of 6 events have not even started yet, and we have already identified 3 high-impact severe weather events firing in 3 different regions of the continent at the same time, all coming from the same upstream wave configuration. That is the structural anomaly. That is what makes this week unusual, not any one of the 3 events on its own. The 3 of them, together, simultaneously, from the same forcing. Now I want to take a beat and zoom out because what I have just walked through is the front end of the 96-hour window, the Saturday into early Sunday morning piece. But there is a part of this story that has been unfolding for the better part of a week already, and that nobody is covering because it has been there long enough to feel like background noise. The river floods in Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska did not start with today's data. They started a week ago, and what is about to happen on Tuesday is going to make them worse. So before we get to Sunday, before we get to the Tuesday-Wednesday reload, let's talk for a minute about the rivers that never stopped rising. Part 5. The rivers that never stopped rising. If you have been paying attention to the Central Plains for the past week or 2, you already know what I'm about to say. The Missouri River system is in flood, has been in flood, is going to stay in flood through Tuesday and probably well past Tuesday. And the reason matters, because the cause of the river flooding is not the cause of tonight's Texas flash flood. It is the leftover signature of a previous expression of the same pattern that is producing tonight's compound event. Let me walk you through the active warnings. The Missouri River at Miami, Missouri, affecting Salem, Chariton and Carroll counties, is in a flood warning until late Wednesday evening. Minor flooding is forecast. At 18 feet, low-lying rural areas outside of levees begin to flood. The Missouri River at Waverly is in a flood warning until Tuesday afternoon. The Missouri River at Napoleon, affecting Ray, Lafayette and Jackson counties, is in a flood warning until early Tuesday morning, with minor flooding occurring and minor flooding forecast. The Grand River near Sumner, affecting Chariton, Lynn, Carroll and Livingston counties, is in a flood warning with moderate flooding occurring and moderate flooding forecast through late Tuesday evening. The Grand River near Chillicothe is in a flood warning until early Monday afternoon. The Grand River near Gallatin is in a flood warning until late Monday morning. The Grand River near Pattonsburg, affecting Daviess and Gentry counties, is in a flood warning with moderate flooding occurring and moderate flooding forecast until late Sunday evening. At 25 feet on the Pattonsburg gauge, low-lying farmland begins to flood. At 30 feet, nearly all agricultural land along the river floods. The Platte River near Platte City, Missouri, was just upgraded from minor severity to moderate severity overnight. The forecast moderate flooding will continue through late Wednesday evening. The Platte River at Sharp Station and the Platte River near Agency are both in flood warnings with moderate flooding. The 102 River at Rosendale in Andrew and Buchanan counties was also upgraded from minor to moderate. The 102 River at Maryville is in a flood warning with minor flooding. The Big Sioux River near Bruce and near Estellane in eastern South Dakota is in a flood warning until further notice with minor flooding occurring. The Big Blue River near Blue Rapids in Marshall County, Kansas, is in a flood warning. The Salt Creek near Ada in Ottawa County, Kansas, is in a flood warning. The Turkey Creek near DeWitt in Gage and Saline counties, Nebraska, is in a flood warning. Added up, 18 separate river flood warnings, several of them upgraded to moderate flooding in the last 24 hours, spanning Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska and South Dakota. The total water in the system is enormous. The downstream consequences are already in the agricultural land. The infrastructure consequences, the bridges, the rural roads, the levees, are taking the stress test in real time. And this is the situation right now before Tuesday's incoming surface low even arrives. Now, here is the part of this that the headline coverage does not get to, because the headline coverage moves on as soon as the floodwaters stop being the immediate news of the day. The Missouri River and the Grand and the Platte are still in flood mode because of rainfall that fell over the Central Plains in the past several days. The rainfall came from the atmospheric pattern that has been producing severe weather across the Midwest all spring. The same pattern, in fact, that we covered in the bomb cyclone video, and in the atmosphere lock floods video, and in the drought to deluge video. That pattern is the same pattern that is producing tonight's compound event. What this means, operationally, is that the rivers in the Central Plains are going to take Tuesday and Wednesday's reload, while they are still in flood mode. The Tuesday surface low, the one the WPC is describing as an unseasonably strong low-pressure system for June, the one that is going to drag a cold front across the northern plains and fire off Tuesday and Wednesday's severe weather, is going to dump additional rainfall into the same upstream catchments that have not yet finished draining the previous round. The rivers are not going to crest and recede before Tuesday's water arrives. They are going to crest, and the next round is going to start pushing the crests higher. The Pattonsburg gauge on the Grand River is forecast to be at moderate flooding until late Sunday evening. If you add Tuesday's rainfall on top of that, the flood mode does not break. It extends. The same is true for the Sharp Station gauge on the Platte. The same is true for the Miami gauge on the Missouri itself, which is forecast for minor flooding through late Wednesday evening, even before Tuesday's rain. This is the part of the story I want you to take away from the river flood discussion. The Central Plains river flooding is not a separate event from tonight's compound severe weather. It is the same pattern, expressing itself in a different mode on a different timescale. The atmospheric configuration that is firing the Ohio Valley severe weather and the Texas flash flood right now is the configuration that has been feeding the Central Plains for the past week. The river system is the integrated memory of the pattern. The pattern, as long as it stays locked, keeps writing into that memory. The longer it stays locked, the longer the rivers stay loaded. And that is the part where the next phase of the story matters, because what we are about to walk through on Sunday and into next week is the next several days of the pattern. Whether it breaks or holds is the question that determines what happens to the rivers, to the heat dome, to the western fire weather, to all of it. The next 48 hours of weather is determined by the pattern. The next 10 days of consequence is determined by whether the pattern locks or releases. Let's see what the pattern is doing on Sunday. Now, I want to spend a beat on what is structurally different about Missouri River and Grand River flooding, compared with the flash flood event you might think of as the prototype. The flash flood is a single point source event. A thunderstorm dumps 3 inches of rain on a watershed in an hour. The water hits a creek. The creek crests within a few hours. The crest moves downstream and either flooded something or did not, and within 12 hours the immediate threat is over. River flooding is the opposite. River flooding is integrated rainfall over a large catchment over an extended time window. The Missouri River at Napoleon is not flooding because it rained hard in Napoleon. It is flooding because it rained over the entire upper Missouri basin over the past 2 weeks, and the basin is now slowly emptying itself downstream. The Grand River at Pattonsburg is moderate flooding because the rainfall accumulated across an enormous geographic area, and the river stage rise that you can see on the gauge is the integrated downstream signature of 2 weeks of upstream weather. That difference matters for 2 reasons. First, it means the river flooding is going to keep going long after the rainfall stops, because the catchment is still emptying itself. The Pattonsburg crest is forecast for late Sunday evening. The Napoleon crest is forecast for early Tuesday morning. The Miami crest is forecast for late Wednesday evening. The water has not arrived yet. It is upstream, in the catchment, slowly making its way down. The river is going to keep rising even on the days when it does not rain in the local watershed. Second, it means Tuesday's incoming surface low is going to write into a system that is already loaded. The Tuesday rainfall is not going to be a single big event. It is going to be the kind of multi-day frontal passage rainfall that distributes itself across the same upstream catchments. 2 to 3 inches of rain over the upper basin, spread across 2 days, on top of basins that are already at moderate flooding stages, is the kind of secondary loading that extends crest durations and pushes the gauges higher than the current forecast contemplates. The forecast right now does not include Tuesday's rainfall. The forecast will be updated as Tuesday gets closer. If you live anywhere along the lower Missouri, the lower Grand, or the lower Platte, you should be paying attention to those updates. I want to also say something about the levee systems, because the levees are the part of the river flood story that does not show up in the headline alerts. The Missouri River levee system is a patchwork of federal levees, state levees, and private agricultural levees, with vastly different design specifications and engineering tolerances. Some of those levees are designed to handle a 100-year flood. Some are designed to handle a 50-year flood. Some are designed to handle a 20-year flood. Some are just earthen berms with no formal design at all. The current Missouri River system stages are below the design failure thresholds for most of the federal levee system. The stages are not below the design failure thresholds for all of the private agricultural levees. Levee breaches in the agricultural levee system have been documented on the Grand River and on the lower Platte during the past 2 weeks. Most of those breaches have been minor and have not made the headline coverage. They have, however, contributed to the cumulative flood inundation footprint, and they are part of why the forecast call right now is for sustained flood stage conditions through Wednesday, rather than a quick recession. The river system, in other words, is the integrated memory of the pattern. The Missouri Basin gauge readings right now are the leftover record of the last 2 weeks of weather. Tuesday's incoming surface low is going to add another layer to that record. The pattern, as long as it stays locked, keeps writing into the river system. The unlocking of the pattern is what unloads the rivers. Until then, the rivers stay loaded. This is also the part of the story where I want to flag something for anybody who is living in any of the flood stage counties right now. The current flood warnings are real. The forecast crest values are based on rainfall that has already fallen. If you're in a low-lying area, if you're along a river, if you're downstream of a levee that has any history of breaching, you should be paying attention to the local emergency management office's communications. The federal, state, local floodplain management framework is set up to handle this kind of event. The communication is going to come from your local office. The role of the channel here is not to substitute for that local communication. The role of the channel is to give you the bigger atmospheric picture that makes the local forecast make sense. The bigger atmospheric picture in this case is that the river floods in Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska are not over. They are not going to be over by Tuesday. They are going to be loaded by Tuesday's surface low. The pattern that is producing the compound severe weather event we have been walking through is the same pattern that is loading the rivers. The pattern is not breaking yet. The pattern is reloading on Tuesday. The pattern, if the European model verifies, is going to deliver a Wednesday severe weather day that the SPC has not yet upgraded to its highest categories, but is watching closely. That is the picture for the rivers. That is why the river floods belong in this video, even though most of the audience watching is not directly affected by them. They are the integrated memory of the pattern. The pattern is what we are tracking. Part 6. Sunday. And the pattern reloads. The day. 2 convective outlook from the Storm Prediction Center, released just before 1 in the morning Central Time, identifies a slight risk corridor across the northern plains for Sunday. The threats in the corridor are large to very large hail, severe wind gusts, and a possible tornado or two. The narrative describes a vorticity maximum and associated mid-level and upper-level jet streaks within the base of broader-scale troughing accelerating northeast through the northern high plains. A hot, deeply mixed boundary layer is expected to develop ahead of the prefrontal trough over the western Dakotas. Steep low-level and mid-level lapse rates contribute to an axis of moderate to strong instability. The Montana and Wyoming storms are expected to mature in a strongly sheared environment, which favors supercells capable of large hail. Some tornado threat may materialize by mid to late evening across portions of north-central North Dakota, where strengthening low-level shear will coincide with a more moist, lower LCL boundary layer. The way to translate that into ordinary language is that Sunday's Northern Plains severe weather setup looks a lot like Saturday's Canadian prairie setup, shifted slightly south, with a slightly different intensity profile. Instead of an STP of 5.2, we are looking at a more moderate environment, but one that still supports supercells producing large to very large hail. The storm mode question is the same. Discrete supercells produce hail and isolated tornadoes. Linear convection produces damaging wind. The forecast right now leans toward a mix. There is a second slight risk in the Day 2 outlook, drawn over central Virginia and into the Chesapeake Bay area. The narrative describes daytime heating coupled with dew points in the 60s, a moderately unstable air mass developing by afternoon, isolated to widely scattered thunderstorms during the afternoon, and locally damaging wind gusts as the primary threat through the afternoon into early evening. That is the mid-Atlantic continuation of Saturday night's Ohio Valley event, shifted east and south as the upper trough progresses. There is also a brief tornado risk identified for eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas. The forcing for ascent is attendant to a vorticity maximum moving through the base of the troughing. The setup is a Sunday afternoon into Sunday evening window for a couple of supercells between 5 and 10 in the evening local time over the Fort Smith corridor, possibly extending southeast of Tulsa. The significant tornado parameter values for this Oklahoma and Arkansas threat are low, between 0 and 1, which means brief spin-up tornadoes are the realistic threat rather than long-track significant tornadoes. Then there is the flash flood threat, which on Sunday shifts east as the upper low itself shifts east. The same training corridor mechanism that is hitting Texas Saturday into Sunday morning is going to set up across Missouri and Arkansas and eastern Kansas and eastern Oklahoma through Sunday. The flooding rain risk is a level 2 of 4. The fuel is a 40-mile-per-hour low-level jet of moist air, which is going to feed sustained heavy rain into the corridor. If you are headed to Busch Stadium for the Cardinals game on Sunday afternoon, you want an umbrella, and you want to be watching for street flooding around the ballpark. Here is the structural piece of Sunday that matters. Sunday is the day where the pattern is doing the same thing it was doing on Saturday, but in different places. The flash flood corridor moves from central Texas to eastern Kansas. The severe weather corridor moves from the Ohio Valley to the mid-Atlantic. A new severe weather corridor opens across the northern plains. The Canadian prairie tornado risk persists in nearly the same place as Saturday, slightly shifted. The pattern does not break, it rotates. And then comes Monday. And Monday is the interesting day because Monday is the day where the pattern looks like it is briefly catching its breath. The threat of severe weather is lower across most of the country on Monday. There could be some severe storms across Illinois during the daytime, isolated large hail and damaging wind gusts. Maybe a low tornado risk over Kentucky or Tennessee. A couple of supercells possible across Minnesota between 4 and 10 in the evening local time, mainly producing large hail and damaging winds. Nebraska, Kansas and Colorado could be in for a stormy afternoon and evening, with mostly a damaging wind threat from a cluster of thunderstorms coming out of the west. The mode is mostly clusters, possibly some discrete supercells out in front of the clusters. If discrete supercells form, we could see a strong tornado, but the odds of that happening right now are fairly low. Monday looks calmer than Saturday or Sunday. Monday is the breath the pattern takes before it loads back up. Because what is coming on Tuesday and Wednesday is, in the operational severe weather community, the part of the week that is being watched closest. Let's go there next, but before we do, I want to talk about what is happening behind the troughs, because the western states have been waiting for their part of this story since Saturday morning, and the heat dome that is building behind everything we have walked through so far is starting to look like the part of the week that has the longest tail. Part 7. Behind the troughs, the heat dome and the fire. While the troughs are rotating through the eastern half of the country, the broad upper-level ridge that has been sitting over the southwestern United States is doing the work that ridges do. It is suppressing convection. It is keeping the air mass beneath it dry. It is driving the surface temperatures up. And, most relevantly for the week we are walking through, it is driving the surface wind gradient strong enough to produce critical fire weather across 6 western states all at the same time. Let's lay out the active alerts. As of 15:09 UTC on June 6th, the western states have 21 active red flag warnings and 16 fire weather watches active simultaneously. The Wyoming red flag warning, issued by the Riverton office and active until 8 in the evening Mountain Daylight Time, covers Natrona County in central Wyoming. Southwest winds at 15 to 25 miles per hour, gusts up to 35 miles per hour, humidity as low as 7%. The Nevada and Arizona Lake Mead Corridor red flag warning, issued by the Las Vegas office and active until 11 in the evening Pacific Daylight Time, covers the Spring Mountains, the Sheep Range, the Clark and southwestern Lincoln County deserts, and into Arizona's northwest plateau. Southwest winds at 20 to 25 miles per hour, gusts up to 40 miles per hour, humidity at 5 to 15%. The Colorado Plains red flag warning, issued by the Denver office and active until 7 in the evening, covers northeast Weld, central and south Weld, Morgan, central and east Adams and Arapahoe, and Logan counties. Southeast winds at 15 to 25 miles per hour, gusts up to 30 miles per hour, relative humidity as low as 14%. The Nevada Eastern Counties red flag warning, issued by the Elko office and active until 11 in the evening. Pacific Daylight Time, covers southeastern Humboldt and northern Lander, White Pine and northeast Nye, northern Nye, central Nevada Toyaba, Humboldt County Quinn, and the western Elko County area. Sustained southwest winds near 20 miles per hour, with gusts near 35 miles per hour, minimum relative humidity values as low as 9%. That is the snapshot for the next 24 hours. Beyond Saturday, the picture gets worse, not better. The Goodland Hazardous Weather Outlook for the tri-state area of southwest Nebraska and northwest Kansas and east central Colorado says critical fire weather conditions are possible during the middle of next week, with a 30% chance that these conditions last for several hours. Fires that develop may rapidly grow and spread out of control. The Denver AFD says widespread critical fire weather conditions are expected in fuel-prone areas by Tuesday and Wednesday. The Las Vegas Fire Weather Watch extends through Monday morning to Tuesday evening. The Pocatello Fire Weather Watch for the Twin Falls area extends through Sunday evening for gusty winds and low relative humidity. What that all adds up to, in plain language, is that the western fire weather situation is the second pattern signature of the week. The same broad upper ridge that is making the heat dome over the central and eastern United States is driving the wind gradient on its western flank that is producing the critical fire weather across the mountain west. Same pattern, different consequence. And while the eastern flank of the trough produces severe convection, the western flank of the ridge produces fire weather. Both are expressions of the same upstream wave configuration. That brings me to the heat dome itself, because the heat dome is the headline piece of the story for the back half of next week, and it is the piece that connects everything we have walked through so far to the longer arc consequences. The Weather Prediction Center's extended forecast discussion, released at 4 in the morning Eastern Time today, is explicit. The opening line says a significant heat wave will build over a large portion of the central to eastern United States mid to late next week. The first significant heat wave of the summer. The detail says the larger ridge will support broad areas of above normal temperatures and heat indices as the heat wave takes hold in the central United States Tuesday and Wednesday, shifting and expanding into the eastern United States later in the week. The numbers: Denver could reach near 100 degrees Fahrenheit on Tuesday. The standing Denver record for the date is 98 degrees, set in 1918. So Tuesday at Denver Stapleton has the potential to flirt with a record that has stood since the Wilson administration. South Florida heat indices climb into the low to mid-100s on Sunday for the Gulf Coast, with the Miami AFD noting that the precipitable water values over Florida are falling to the 1.1 to 1.4 inch range, which is near the lowest end for early June. Wisconsin's Milwaukee and Sullivan office is calling for potential heat advisory conditions Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. North Texas, after the rain is done, has heat index values near or above 100 degrees returning for the post-flood week. I want to point at the wet bulb video we did earlier this week because the wet bulb framework is the right one for thinking about what the heat dome is going to do, not just to people, but to infrastructure. The wet bulb is the measure of heat that accounts for humidity. A high air temperature with low humidity is sweat survivable. A high wet bulb temperature is not. The theoretical 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb limit that Sherwood and Huber proposed in their 2010 PNAS paper is not the only relevant number. The empirical work that Vecellio and his collaborators did at the Penn State heat chambers established that the actual critical wet bulb temperature for healthy young adults is closer to 31 degrees Celsius. Older adults, the research suggests, have an even lower tolerance. The wet bulb framework is the right one for understanding why heat-related casualties spike during sustained heat waves with high humidity. The framework was the central topic of the May United Kingdom heatwave video earlier this week. The framework is going to be relevant again as the central and eastern United States heatwave takes hold. The eastern half of the United States is not going to hit 31 wet bulb during this heat wave. That is the honest call. The framework is relevant not because we are about to see catastrophe, but because the magnitude is the kind of magnitude where the wet bulb framework is the right one to be using, where the operational risk is exactly the kind of risk the framework predicts, where the infrastructure stress is the kind of stress the framework predicts. The heat wave coming next week is the kind of heat wave the framework predicts more of, with rising frequency, with rising amplitude, in a warming background climate. That is the connective tissue between this week's compound event and the broader thread that runs through our earlier video this week on the May United Kingdom heatwave and the Pacific heatwave video from a couple of weeks ago and the videos before them. Now, the most important thing about the heat dome for the structure of this video is that it is being driven by the same pattern as everything else we have walked through. The same broad upper-level ridge that is feeding plains instability with moisture and instability profiles is the ridge that is suppressing convection across the desert southwest and driving the wind gradient on its western flank that is producing the critical fire weather. The same ridge is the ridge that is going to lock heat over the central and eastern United States by midweek. The same ridge is the one that is going to extend the Central Plains River flooding by feeding Tuesday's incoming surface low, one pattern, 4 consequences across the same week. That brings us to what is coming on Tuesday and Wednesday. Because Tuesday is the day where the pattern reloads in the most dangerous mode, and Wednesday is the day where the multi-model convergence is the part of this story that has the operational severe weather community paying the closest attention. I also want to take a beat on what the wind gradient mechanism on the western flank of the ridge is actually doing, because the fire weather setup is one of those things that is easy to summarize as low humidity plus high winds, but that is structurally driven by the same upstream pattern as everything else we have walked through. When you have a strong ridge sitting over the desert southwest, the air mass beneath the ridge is subsiding. Subsiding air warms adiabatically, which dries it out. The vertical profile underneath the ridge looks like a deep dry layer above a relatively shallow surface boundary layer. The surface boundary layer is where the surface winds live, and the wind speed at the surface is driven by the pressure gradient at the surface, which is itself driven by the position of the synoptic scale features. What the upstream pattern is doing right now is positioning the surface pressure pattern such that the gradient between the high pressure to the south and the lower pressure to the north is tight across the mountain west. A tight pressure gradient produces strong winds. Strong winds, blowing across a deep dry boundary layer with mid-tier vegetation that has been baking in the sun for weeks, produces the fire weather environment we are seeing in the alerts. The mechanism connects, in other words, all the way back to the upstream wave configuration. The same wave train that is producing the Ohio Valley severe weather is producing the position of the southwestern ridge that is producing the wind gradient on its western flank that is producing the fire weather across 6 states. That is why the fire weather sits in this video alongside the severe weather. It is not a separate event. It is the same pattern in a different mode. The same upstream forcing produces the same downstream consequence across multiple regions of the continent simultaneously. The QRA framework gives the reason. The fire weather is the dry side signature of the wave train. The severe weather is the wet side signature. The river floods are the integrated memory signature. The heat dome is the ridge signature. The Saskatchewan tornado is the warm sector northeast extension signature. The Texas cutoff low is the cutoff low signature. 6 modes. 1 pattern, 1 mechanism. I want to also walk through one more piece of the heat dome question, because the wet bulb framework I mentioned a moment ago is the framework that matters, but the operational consequences of the heat dome go beyond mortality. The infrastructure stress is the part of the story that does not get headline coverage, but that matters across the long arc. The climate central work that we covered in our earlier video this week on the May United Kingdom heatwave documented a 60% increase in US heat season power outages over the past decade. The mechanism is straightforward. High temperatures stress the transformer infrastructure. The transformer oil heats up. The transformers derate, which is to say they can handle less load than their nameplate capacity at higher temperatures. The grid load goes up at the same time because everybody's running their air conditioning. The combination produces transformer failures at a higher rate than under cooler conditions. The transformer failures cascade into local outages. The outages cascade into more transformer failures because the surviving transformers take more of the load. The first significant heat wave of the summer next week is not going to produce a grid failure. The grid is in better shape than that. but it is going to be the kind of stress test that the grid takes every year, and that the grid is going to take more of as the heat events become more frequent and more intense. The Texas grid in particular, which has its own interconnection and is not directly tied to the eastern interconnection, is the one most exposed to compound stress events, of the kind that are going to follow the Texas flash flood and then the Texas heat dome arrival. The grid operators are going to be watching closely. The infrastructure stress test is real, and again, this is not unique to next week. The infrastructure stress test happens every summer. It is going to happen more often and at higher intensity as the background warming continues. The next decade is going to see more weeks like this. The transformer failure rate is going to climb, the summer outage frequency is going to climb, the aggregate consequences are going to be real, the mechanism is documented. Part 8, Tuesday and Wednesday. The day. The models are afraid of the WPC extended forecast discussion released this morning uses a phrase that is worth lingering on. The phrase is unseasonably strong low-pressure system, especially for June. That is the operational language for a synoptic scale surface low that is significantly deeper than the climatological mean for the calendar date. Surface lows in June across the northern plains are not unprecedented. They happen. They are the climatological building blocks of summer severe weather. What is unseasonable about Tuesday's incoming surface low is the magnitude. The central pressure is forecast to be lower than the June mean. The synoptic scale forcing it is going to deliver is more like a late spring surface low than an early summer surface low. The track forecast is reasonably tight at this point in the multi-model guidance. The surface low moves from the northern high plains early Tuesday eastward on Wednesday and consolidates in south-central Canada by early Thursday. The cold front it drags behind it is going to focus the convection. The plentiful moisture and the instability and the shear that the surface low is going to organise ahead of itself are the ingredients for what the SPC is already calling out in its hazardous weather outlooks as a multi-day risk window across the northern plains and the upper Midwest. Tuesday's risk corridor is, broadly, North Dakota, South Dakota and western Minnesota. The European model and the GFS are in fair agreement on this part of the forecast. The dynamics support a severe weather day. The mode is likely to be a mix of supercells and linear convection. The threats are large hail, damaging winds, and a possible tornado or two. The central question for Tuesday is the timing of the convective initiation relative to the daytime heating cycle, which is going to determine how much instability is available when the storms fire. Wednesday is where the forecast guidance starts to diverge, and that divergence is the part of the story that the operational severe weather community is watching closest. The GFS model, the American Operational Global Model, is not particularly bullish on Wednesday. The forecast shows severe weather across parts of the Midwest, particularly Minnesota and Wisconsin, but the GFS is not advertising a high-end day. The European model, by contrast, is markedly more aggressive. The European model is showing a stronger low-level jet shifting east of Minneapolis into Wisconsin, a low-pressure system that organises further, and a much more favourable environment for severe weather across Minnesota and Wisconsin on Wednesday afternoon and evening. The European model is hinting at the possibility of a tornado outbreak. The GFS is not. When the European model and the GFS diverge this far apart on a Wednesday severe weather setup, the operational call is to lean on the European model, because the European model has on average the better skill score for synoptic scale precipitation and surface forcing patterns at the 3 to 5 day lead. The European model has been more aggressive in its position of the low-level jet, more aggressive on the position of the surface low, more aggressive on the magnitude of the convective parameters. If the European model is right, Wednesday could be a tornado outbreak day across parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. If the GFS is right, Wednesday is a more ordinary severe weather day. The forecast confidence is below the level where you can call it either way, but the European model has the momentum. I want to be clear about what tornado outbreak means in this context, because the phrase gets overused. The operational definition of a tornado outbreak is 6 or more confirmed tornadoes within a single weather event. The European model is showing an environment that supports a tornado outbreak. It is not guaranteeing one. It is saying that the wind shear and the instability in the storm mode setup, if they verify, support that kind of outcome. Whether it happens depends on hundreds of small things. The position of the warm sector at the time of convective initiation, the timing of the cold front, the strength of the cap, the depth of the moisture. Any one of those things can suppress the outcome. None of them is currently forecast to suppress it. The risk is on the table. It is real. If you live in central Minnesota, in southern Minnesota, in Wisconsin, especially the western half of Wisconsin, the I-94 corridor between Minneapolis and Eau Claire, between Eau Claire and Madison, then the Wednesday forecast is the one to be paying closest attention to. You should be paying attention to the SPC Outlook releases between now and Wednesday. The Day 3 Outlook will be released on Sunday morning. The Day 2 Outlook will be released on Monday morning. The Day 1 Outlook will be released on Tuesday morning. The progressive trend of those outlooks, whether the risk gets upgraded or stays the same or downgraded, is the operational signal for what the forecast actually expects to happen. Behind the Tuesday and Wednesday risk, there is a Thursday risk on the table as well, because the same pattern is forecast to keep producing severe weather as the surface low consolidates over south-central Canada and the cold front continues to move east. The European model is hinting at extending the severe weather threat into Thursday across a pretty large area east of the upper Midwest, possibly into the Ohio Valley and the Mid-Atlantic. The GFS is less aggressive on this part of the forecast as well. The trend bears watching. There is also a Wednesday into Thursday consequence for the rivers across the Central Plains, because Tuesday's surface low is going to deliver additional rainfall into the same upstream catchments where the Missouri, Grand and Platte are already in flood. The forecast is not for a single high-impact rainfall event in the Central Plains during the Tuesday-Wednesday window, but the cumulative effect of additional rainfall on top of an already saturated basin system is the kind of effect that extends flood durations rather than ending them. Behind all of that, the sun is doing its own version of this story, and I want to take a beat for the space weather backdrop because it is part of the broader simultaneity that defines this week. There are 11 numbered active regions on the disk right now. The largest, region 4458, is at 240 millionths of solar surface area and is forming a weak delta signature in its magnetic configuration. Region 4462 is still growing, with 9 spots. Region 4455, which produced the X-class flare of June 3rd, is still on the disk and still carrying a 25% M-class flare probability for the next 24 hours, along with a 5% X-class probability. At 1340 UTC today, June 6th, a new M1.8 flare erupted from a location at S22E24. The Type 2 radio emission that accompanied the flare started at 1347 UTC and indicated a coronal mass ejection with an estimated velocity of 838 km per second. A 10 cm radio burst at 1344 UTC peaked at 190 solar flux units. The greater than 2 MeV electron flux at geosynchronous orbit is expected to rise to high levels today and remain high through Monday. The probability of M-class flares stays at 50% each day for the next 72 hours. The active solar sequence does not directly modulate the surface pattern severe weather event we have been walking through. The energy budget mismatch is 15 to 17 orders of magnitude, and that means the conspiracy frame that solar activity is somehow driving extreme weather does not have a mechanism that the physics will let it use. But the temporal coincidence is real. The solar cycle 25 active region complex remains loaded at the same time the surface pattern is producing a compound continental severe weather event. The same week. The same map. I want to also flag, because we covered it in detail 3 days ago in the video on the 3 violent solar blasts racing toward Earth, that the M9.3 and M7.7 and X1.0 sequence from June 3rd produced yesterday's G2 geomagnetic storm. The G2 reached a peak KP of 6.33 at 1500 UTC on June 5th. The aurora was visible at high latitudes. The storm has now mostly waned, but the energetic particle flux remains elevated through Monday. The active region complex is not done. The next M-class or X-class flare from region 4455 or 4458 is, statistically, on the table. The space weather backdrop, like the heat dome, is the same pattern in a different mode. Solar cycle 25 is in its high activity phase. The active region count is elevated. The probability of significant flares is elevated. The simultaneity with the surface pattern compound event is consistent with the broader pattern-locked character of the week. None of it requires a coupling mechanism beyond temporal coincidence. The temporal coincidence is the thing worth noticing. That brings us to part 9, because we have now walked through all 6 events that are firing in the next 96 hours, and we have walked through the river floods and the heat dome and the western fire weather and the solar backdrop. What we have not done yet is talk about why all 6 of these things are happening at once. The published science has an answer. The answer is not new, the answer is not fringe. The answer is the quasi-resonant amplification mechanism, and it is the part of this story that I want to spend the most time on because it is the part that connects the operational forecast to the broader question about whether what we are watching is normal, or whether what we are watching is the operational expression of a pattern that the warming climate is making more frequent. Part 9. Why 6 storms speak with one voice. There is a body of published peer-reviewed scientific literature in journals at the very top of the climate science hierarchy that describes precisely the kind of compound continental severe weather event we have been walking through for the last hour. The framework is called quasi-resonant amplification. The shorthand is QRA. The papers go back more than a decade and the framework is mature, and the mechanism is well understood enough that the operational severe weather community uses it, the operational climate monitoring community uses it, and the long-range forecasting community uses it. The framework is not new. The framework is not fringe. The framework is in the textbook now. Let me walk you through what it actually says, and I am going to do it in a way that does not require you to have a meteorology degree because the mechanism is, when you peel back the technical language, not all that complicated. The jet stream is a river of fast-moving air at the boundary between the cold polar air and the warm tropical air. It runs around the northern hemisphere at roughly the latitude of the United States and Canada. The speed of the jet stream is driven by the temperature gradient between the equator and the pole. The bigger the temperature difference, the faster the jet. The smaller the temperature difference, the slower the jet. When the jet stream is fast, it tends to flow in a relatively straight east to west pattern, with small meanders, and weather systems move along it quickly. A cold front passes through your city in a day and is gone in 2. When the jet stream is slow, it tends to develop large north to south meanders, with deep troughs digging south and tall ridges sticking up north, and the meanders move slowly. A cold front that gets caught in a slow meander pattern can sit over the same region for days. A ridge that gets caught in a slow meander pattern can hold heat over the same region for a week or 2. The pattern locks. Now here is the key insight. When the jet stream meanders take on a particular wave number pattern, with somewhere around 5 to 8 large waves spaced around the northern hemisphere, and when those waves take on a high amplitude with deep troughs and tall ridges, and when those waves stop moving, you get what the literature calls quasi-resonant amplification. The wave train sits still. The same regions sit underneath the same parts of the wave train for days or weeks. The trough positions become locked, the ridge positions become locked, and every region underneath the trough gets the same weather day after day after day, while every region underneath the ridge gets a different weather day after day after day. That is the mechanism. The 2020 Kornhuber paper in Nature Climate Change formalized the framework and showed that QRA events correlate with simultaneous high-impact extremes across geographically separated regions of the Northern Hemisphere. The 2023 Kornhuber paper in Nature Communications extended the framework to synchronized concurrent extremes, showing that QRA events correlate with simultaneous high-impact weather impacting multiple agricultural breadbaskets at once. The 2021 Han paper in Water Resources Research showed that low-phase speed Rossby wave packets are the dynamical signature of the persistent extreme weather patterns the QRA framework predicts. What does any of that have to do with the next 96 hours? Everything. The current upper-level pattern over North America has the QRA signature. Trough over the west, ridge over the central United States, trough over the eastern United States. The waves are high amplitude. The phase speed is slow. The pattern has been locked for the better part of a week. Every region underneath each piece of the wave train is taking the weather that piece of the wave train delivers. The Ohio Valley, sitting underneath the eastern trough, is taking the severe convection. The central and eastern plains, sitting underneath the ridge, are about to take the heat wave. The desert southwest, sitting on the western flank of the ridge, is taking the critical fire weather. The northern high plains, sitting near the base of the western trough, is taking the surface low and the Tuesday-Wednesday severe weather reload. The Canadian prairie, sitting underneath the warm sector northeast extension of the wave train, is taking the tornado threat. The slow-moving upper low over Texas is the cut-off low that always forms when a strong wave train pattern develops, and it is sitting still over the state because the wave train it cut off from is not moving. 6 events. 1 pattern. The pattern has a name. The published science has the mechanism. The mechanism is operational. And the question, when you put the whole picture together, is not whether the events are coming. The forecasts say they are. The question is whether the pattern that is producing them is the kind of pattern we should expect to see more of as the planet warms. That is where the Rantanen 2022 paper in Communications, Earth and Environment comes in. The paper documented that the Arctic is warming at approximately 4 times the global mean rate. The mechanism for why that matters to the jet stream is the temperature gradient point I made at the start of this part. When the Arctic warms faster than the equator, the temperature gradient driving the jet stream weakens. The jet slows. The slow jet develops higher amplitude meanders. The high amplitude meanders are exactly the configuration that the QRA framework predicts will produce simultaneous geographically separated extreme weather events. In plain language, Arctic warming weakens the jet stream. A weaker jet stream develops bigger waves. Bigger waves get stuck. Stuck waves produce compound continental extremes. The next 96 hours of weather across North America is the operational expression of a pattern that the published science predicts will become more frequent as the Arctic continues to warm. I want to be careful with how I am phrasing this, because the framework is established and the mechanism is operational, but the attribution of any single event to the warming background climate is a harder scientific call. The peer-reviewed literature does not yet establish, with the kind of certainty that the operational meteorology community would require, that the specific compound event unfolding across North America right now would not have happened in the absence of the background warming. What the literature does establish is that the kind of compound continental extreme event the next 96 hours is producing has become more frequent over the last several decades, and is predicted to become more frequent still over the coming decades, in a way that is consistent with the QRA mechanism and the Arctic amplification background. That is the honest framing. The pattern is real. The mechanism is published. The framework predicts more events like this. Any single event is hard to attribute formally. The aggregate trend is clearer than the individual case. I want to also walk through the alternative interpretation, because it is worth holding, and the channel discipline is to hold both interpretations open until the data settles the question. The alternative is the null hypothesis, which is that the next 96 hours is a random expression of natural climate variability. Compound severe weather weeks happen. The historical record contains examples. The 2010 Milbury anniversary I have mentioned multiple times in this video is one piece of evidence. The 2010 record for compound severe weather days in June is comparable to the 2026 record so far. The 2011 super outbreak season produced compound severe weather across multiple regions of the country simultaneously. The 1936 mega flood year produced multiple simultaneous record river floods across the central and eastern United States. The 1953 tornado season produced compound severe events across the plains and the south simultaneously. The history is real. Compound events happen. The question is not whether they happen, but whether their frequency and amplitude are changing. The published science says they are. The historical baseline data says they are. The operational meteorology community is now operating under the assumption that they are. But any individual event remains on its own, possibly random. That uncertainty is the honest scientific call. We are watching what the framework predicts. We are not on the basis of any single event proving the framework. The proof comes from the aggregate over decades. There is one more piece of the picture that I want to fold in, because the broader Earth system context matters. The ENSO state right now is warm neutral and trending warming. The official Oceanic Niño Index for March, April and May of 2026 came in at plus 0.48. That is in the warm neutral range. The October, November, December reading from 2025 was minus 0.55 in the cool neutral range. The 6-month delta is approximately plus 1.03 degrees Celsius. That is one of the faster cool-to-warm ENSO transitions in the modern instrumental record, comparable to the early phase of the 2014 to 2015 El Niño onset. The June 1st ECMWF-SEAS 5 plume, which we covered in yesterday's video, suggested a 51-member ensemble convergence on plus 3 degrees Celsius warming in the Niño 3.4 region by December of 2026. That is the strongest El Niño the modern instrumental record can measure, forming on top of a planet that is already 1.2 degrees warmer than the 1876 baseline. The broader Earth system signal is loading. That broader Earth system signal is the same broader Earth system signal that produces the kind of pattern-locked atmosphere that the QRA framework predicts. The warming Arctic, the slowing jet stream, the high-amplitude wave trains, the stuck pattern, the compound continental severe weather events that result. The signal is integrated across the climate system. The 2026 hurricane season is going to be loaded by the same ENSO signal that is loading the 2026 atmospheric pattern. Tropical Storm Amanda in the East Pacific this week is the first signal of the season's tropical activity. The first significant heat wave of the summer building over the central and eastern United States next week is the first signal of the summer's continental heat dome activity. The ENSO warming, the QRA pattern locking, the compound severe weather event firing across the continent, the river floods carrying the leftover signature of the previous expression of the same pattern, all of it, one integrated signal. That is the framework. That is what the science says. That is what is happening across the next 96 hours. What I want to leave you with as we move toward the end of this video is the structural question, because the framework does not resolve the question. The framework just gives us the right way to ask it. There is a second piece of the QRA framework I want to walk through, because the framework has been refined since the original Petukov work in 2013 and the original Kornhuber work in 2017, and the refinement matters for understanding what we are watching this week. The 2020 Kornhuber paper introduced the concept of zonal wave number 7 dominance. The hemispheric wave train, when it gets stuck in the QRA configuration, tends to organize itself into a pattern of 7 roughly equally spaced waves around the northern hemisphere mid-latitudes. The 7-wave pattern is a particular kind of stationary configuration. When the hemisphere locks into the 7-wave pattern, the trough and ridge positions become particularly stable, and the same regions sit underneath the same wave train pieces for extended periods. The 2023 Kornhuber paper extended this work to synchronize concurrent extremes, showing that the 7-wave QRA pattern is associated with simultaneous high-impact weather impacting multiple geographically separated regions of the Northern Hemisphere at the same time. The paper documented specific historical events, including the 2010 Russian heat wave that coincided with the Pakistan floods that coincided with the China heat wave, all of which occurred during a documented QRA 7-wave event. The 2018 European heat wave that coincided with the Japan heat wave and the California fires also occurred during a documented QRA event. The 2021 Pacific Northwest heat dome that coincided with the Central European floods is also identified in the paper as a QRA consistent event. What that body of work establishes is that the QRA framework is not a hypothetical mechanism. It is documented. It is associated with specific historical events. It is integrated into the operational climate attribution literature. It is the framework that the published peer-reviewed science uses to explain the kind of compound continental extreme weather event that the next 96 hours is producing. The framework also makes a specific prediction that is testable. The prediction is that QRA events become more frequent as the Arctic warms faster than the equator. The Rantanen 2022 paper documenting the 4 times faster Arctic warming is the supporting piece. The aggregate frequency of QRA events over the past several decades is also documented in the literature, and the trend is upward. The events are not yet at the level where any single event can be attributed formally to the warming background climate, but the aggregate trend is real, and the trend is in the direction the framework predicts. I also want to flag, because the channel discipline is to address the limits of the framework as well as the framework itself, that the QRA framework is not without scientific critique. There is a debate in the climate dynamics literature about whether the QRA mechanism is the dominant driver of the observed trends in compound continental extreme weather, or whether other mechanisms, including changes in the storm track position, changes in the Hadley cell expansion, or changes in the planetary scale temperature gradient outside the Arctic, are also playing roles. The 2017 Mahn and Ramstorff paper that originally documented the link between QRA and extreme weather was followed by a debate in the Geophysical Research Letters and the Journal of Climate about the statistical significance of the trend. The current scientific consensus is that QRA is one of several mechanisms contributing to the observed trend, with the relative contributions still being worked out. The framework is mature enough to be in the operational literature, but it is not the only piece of the puzzle. That nuance matters because the public-facing story about the kind of compound event we are watching this week is sometimes told as if QRA is the whole answer. It is not. The QRA mechanism is one mechanism. The storm track shift mechanism is another. The Hadley cell expansion mechanism is another. The planetary scale temperature gradient changes outside the Arctic are another. The aggregate trend of compound extreme weather events is driven by a combination of these mechanisms, and the relative contributions are still being scientifically debated. The honest framing is that the framework is real, the mechanism is documented, the trend is in the predicted direction, but the full attribution is still being worked out at the level of the peer-reviewed literature. That brings me back to the structural question of this video. The next 96 hours is one expression of the kind of compound continental extreme weather event that the warming background climate is producing more often. The mechanism, or rather the mechanisms that produce these events, are documented. The aggregate trend is documented. The individual event is not, by itself, formally attributable. The honest call is that we are watching what the framework predicts. We are not, on the basis of any single event, proving the framework. The proof comes from the accumulation over time. Part 10. Coincidence or signature. Here is what we know, and here is what we do not know. We know there is a slight risk corridor stretching from central Indiana through the upper Ohio Valley into southern New England for tonight, covering 26 million people, with damaging wind gusts as the primary threat and a peak window between 3 and 8 in the evening Eastern Time. We know the HREF probability matched mean guidance for the slow-moving upper low parked over Texas is showing a worst-case rainfall bullseye of 8 to 10 inches through Sunday morning, with the official Fort Worth Flood Watch advertising the more conservative 6 to 8 inches over the I-35 to I-20 quadrant. We know the HRRR significant tornado parameter for southern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba is showing a peak value of 5.2 for the evening hours, in a region where that value is uncommon in early June. We know there are 21 red flag warnings and 16 fire weather watches active simultaneously across 6 western states. We know 18 separate river flood warnings are active across Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota, with several upgraded to moderate severity in the past 24 hours. We know the WPC extended discussion describes an unseasonably strong low-pressure system for June arriving on Tuesday. We know the European model is markedly more aggressive than the GFS on a Wednesday upper Midwest tornado outbreak across Wisconsin and Minnesota. We know the first significant heat wave of summer is building over the central and eastern United States by mid to late next week. We know the sun is loaded with 11 numbered active regions and a 50% M-class flare probability each day for the next 72 hours. We know the ENSO state is warm neutral and trending toward what could be the strongest El Niño the modern record can measure by December. We also know that the published peer-reviewed scientific literature describes a mechanism called quasi-resonant amplification that connects all of those signatures into a single integrated framework. We know that the framework predicts more events of this kind in a warming background climate. We know that the historical record contains examples of bad weeks that occurred before the background warming had taken hold. We know that compound severe weather events happen even in a stable climate. And we know that, on any single event, the formal attribution to climate change is a harder scientific call than the aggregate trend. What we do not know is whether what we are watching this week is, considered as a single event, an expression of natural climate variability or an expression of the QRA mechanism becoming more frequent. We do not know whether the 1936 mega-flood year is the right historical analogue for what we are watching, or whether 2011's super outbreak season is the right historical analogue, or whether 2026's bad week is going to land in the historical record as just another bad week, or whether it is going to land as one of the inflection point years where the trend became visible enough that the operational community could not avoid it any longer. We will not know the answer to that question for years. The answer comes from the aggregate. The aggregate takes a decade to settle. What you can do right now in the actual next 96 hours is treat the operational forecast for what it is. The forecast is concrete. The forecast says there is going to be severe convection across the Ohio Valley tonight. The forecast says there is going to be flash flooding across central Texas tonight. The forecast says there is going to be a possible large tornado outbreak across the Canadian prairie tonight. The forecast says there is going to be critical fire weather across the mountain west for days. The forecast says the rivers across the Central Plains are going to stay in flood through Tuesday, and probably beyond. The forecast says Tuesday is going to deliver an unseasonably strong surface low. The forecast says Wednesday could be a tornado outbreak across the upper Midwest. The forecast says the first significant heat wave of summer is going to build over the central and eastern United States by midweek. Treat the forecast for what it is. It have a way to take shelter if you are in any of the severe weather corridors, have a way to know when a warning gets issued, stay out of the water if you're anywhere near a flooded creek or a flooded bayou or a flooded river. Tie your trampoline down, pay attention to the weather radio, have a plan for what you do if the power goes out, have a plan for what you do if the wind comes up. These are not new pieces of advice. These are not advice the federal warning machinery has not given you before. These are not advice that requires any particular interpretation of the long arc question we have been holding through this video. These are the operational basics. They apply tonight, and they will apply every night this week. I want to flag one more thing before I let you go, and I want to flag it because the channel discipline is to address the conspiracy framings head-on, rather than to leave them in the comments and let them grow without an answer. The kind of event we are watching this week is exactly the kind of event that draws conspiracy framing. The frames are predictable. Someone is engineering the pattern. The federal government is hiding something. The aircraft contrails are doing it. HAARP is doing it. The Earth is being targeted. The sun is being weaponized. The pattern of attention these frames get is a particular pattern, and it is worth saying out loud why those frames do not match the actual physics. The energy budget argument applies to all of them. HAARP operates at 3.6 megawatts. The kinetic energy of a single mid-strength supercell thunderstorm is on the order of 10 to the 16th or 10 to the 17th joules. The energy difference is 14 to 15 orders of magnitude. That is comparable to claiming a flashlight could heat a planet. There is no plausible mechanism by which an energy budget that's small can drive an energy budget that large. The cloud seeding pathway, which is a real technology and has measurable effects, produces somewhere between 5 and 15% precipitation enhancement in existing clouds, per the Shearer-West Caldera-Davis 2016 Environmental Research Letter Survey of 77 geoengineering scientists. There is no plausible cloud seeding pathway to produce a 95th percentile precipitable water stream over Texas, or an STP value of 5.2 over Saskatchewan. The aircraft contrails contribute approximately 3.5% of global radiative forcing, with persistent contrails contributing a small fraction of that, and the QRA mechanism operates on planetary scale temperature gradient forcing that is orders of magnitude beyond what aircraft can deliver. The federal warning machinery is hiding. It frame fails on its own terms because the federal warning machinery has issued 235 active alerts as of 15:09 UTC today and is publicly broadcasting every single forecast detail we have walked through in this video. The science explains the pattern. The conspiracy frames mistake the scale. The honest framing for what we are watching is the published peer-reviewed framework, the QRA mechanism, the Arctic amplified jet weakening, the high-amplitude stuck-wave trains, the compound continental severe weather events that result. The framework predicts more events like this in a warming climate. The framework does not require any covert intervention to produce this week's compound event. The mechanism is documented. The atmosphere is doing exactly what the mechanism says it should do. The honest framing is the one that takes the science seriously. What I want to leave you with is the structural question that frames the whole video. When 6 structurally distinct severe weather modes are firing across North America in a single 96-hour window, all driven by the same upstream atmospheric pattern, all consistent with a published peer-reviewed mechanism that has been documented for more than a decade, all unfolding while the broader Earth system signals are loading in the same direction, all happening in a year that is on pace to produce the strongest El Niño signature, the modern record can measure on top of a planet that has already crossed the 1.2 degrees Celsius warming threshold. At what point do we stop calling this a coincidence and start calling it the operational signature of the kind of compound continental severe weather pattern the warming climate is producing more often? The next 96 hours is not going to answer that question by itself. The historical record contains bad weeks. The bad weeks happen even in a stable climate. The aggregate trend takes a decade to settle. We are watching one data point in a long series of data points that is going to take years to fully resolve. But here is the thing about data points. They land. They accumulate. They become part of the record, and the record over time settles. The question is not whether the answer to the structural question we have been asking is going to arrive. The question is whether you are paying attention as the record fills in. This week is a data point. The next several years are going to be filled with data points. The pattern is loaded. The mechanism is documented. The framework predicts more. The Arctic is warming. The jet stream is slowing. The wave trains are getting bigger. The pattern is locking more often. The compound events are firing more often. The historical record is being rewritten. There is one more thing I want to leave you with. Because the asteroid catalogue is something we have been watching across the spring and into the summer, and the close approach data for the next week includes a small one that is worth noting. Asteroid 2026 LD will pass Earth at 2.97 lunar distances on June 9th at 5:21 UTC, travelling at 9.3 kilometers per second. The object is small, in the 10 to 20 meter class, comparable to the Chelyabinsk superbolide of 2013. The miss distance is comfortable. The object is not on an impact trajectory. The closest natural approach in the watch list for the next 2 weeks is comfortably outside any threshold of concern. The Tunguska-class object, the kind that could cause significant regional damage if it hit the atmosphere, is not on the close approach list for the period. I mention the asteroid not because it is a threat in itself, but because the audience that has been with this channel for a while knows that the close approach catalogue is the kind of background data we always check during a compound event week. The sky environment, like the atmospheric environment, is producing more close approaches as the catalogue has improved its detection capability, but the actual rate of impactor risk is not changing the way the close approach numbers might suggest. The catalogue is more complete. The actual sky environment is not getting more dangerous in any structural sense. We will keep watching the catalogue. We will keep watching the atmosphere. We will keep watching the sun. We will keep watching the rivers. We will keep watching the ENSO state. We will keep watching the published science. We will keep checking our own framework against the data week by week, month by month, year by year, until the structural question we have been holding through this video is one the aggregate has answered. For tonight, the answer to the operational question is simple. There is severe weather coming. The severe weather is going to affect 26 million people in the Ohio Valley and the Northeast through Saturday evening. The slow-moving upper low over Texas is going to deliver 6 to 8 inches of rain to a corridor west of I-35 through Sunday morning, with a worst-case bullseye of 8 to 10 inches on the table. The Canadian Prairie is going to be the day's highest tornado risk in the evening. The rivers in the Central Plains are going to stay loaded. The western fire weather is going to escalate through Tuesday and Wednesday. The Tuesday surface low is going to be unseasonably strong. The Wednesday upper Midwest severe weather setup could be a tornado outbreak. The first significant heat wave of summer is going to build over the central and eastern United States by midweek. Treat it for what it is. Pay attention to the forecast. Take shelter when the warning comes. Tie down the trampoline. Have a plan. Stay out of the water on the roads. The federal warning machinery is going to do its job. Your job is to be ready when it does. The pattern is real. The events are coming. The framework is documented. The question is loaded. The next 96 hours is a data point. Be paying attention as it lands. We will be here, watching for the next one.